You're listening to the Fooled by the Root podcast.
I'm so glad you're here to listen to this episode with Alesia and Kara. They started an organization called Right to Know. They believe laws related to genetic information, identity, and family dynamics need to be updated, and I could not agree more. Both of these dynamic women have experienced something called MPE, which is Misattributed Parentage Experience, finding out that one or both of your parents are not a genetic match. As a lot of us know, it is very disorienting to have a shift of identity. With adoptees, that's usually during reunion. With the MPEs, it's when family secrets are uncovered through DNA. This conversation is collaborative at heart. It seems that if we bind together both communities, that we can actually impact the laws and provide every human being with the ability to find out their genetic history. I would like to read you their bios and then we'll drop into the conversation. Alesia is a retired RN, Army veteran, and blog writer. She's a leader in networking for positive emotional support, genealogical research, and education for those impacted by a surprise in their DNA. Due to her own experience from an over-the-counter DNA kit in 2014, she was shocked to her core to find out the man who raised her was not her genetic father. It took her 4 years of sleuthing to discover the identity of her biological father, and unfortunately, he passed years before. After connecting with her genetic family, she discovered 4 members had brain tumors just like she experienced. Had she known she had a genetic predisposition, her doctors probably could have diagnosed her tumor sooner. Kara is a non-practicing attorney with an LLM in taxation and a master's in trade investment policy. In January 2018, she wanted to see where in Africa her father's family came from. Her over-the-counter DNA test revealed she was 50% something, but it wasn't African. This meant that the man on her birth certificate couldn't possibly be her genetic father. She lost her biracial identity with a click of a mouse. Kara discovered she was 50% Ashkenazi Jew. The DNA Pandora's box she opened led to an identity crisis. She is a passionate advocate for genetic identity rights. I hope you enjoy this episode. Let's listen in. Wow, ladies, we have a lot to talk about. So first and foremost, welcome.
Thank you.
So can you educate us on what misattributed parentage experience is and how that connects adoptees and others who are finding out their identity in ways that are very surprising?
We like to use a Venn diagram. I think that's the easiest way for people to understand. We have to thank the adoption community because I think they've paved the way for us, all these sort of newcomers to the table. But when you look at adoption trauma and experiences, there's a lot of overlap with people like Alesia and I who discovered our fathers weren't our fathers through an over-the-counter DNA test. So we look at the 3 different communities that Right to Know services. There's the adoption community, the assisted conception community, and what we call N, like Nancy, NPE community, meaning non paternal event. So you have the adoption community, like hidden adoption, orphans, foster, late discovery, any of those things, any type of adoption, because even people who grew up knowing there's coming out of the fog, there's still the trauma sometimes of coping with your identity because you grew up without genetic mirroring. And then there's those conceived through assisted conception, like from a gamete provider like a sperm or an egg or surrogacy or even an embryo provider. And then non-paternal events like Alesia and I'm the product of a one-night stand or a tryst is what I like to say. Sounds a little better.
I like that. That's better.
Or an extramarital affair or a rape or an assault. And if you think of each of those communities as a bubble, there's an overlap in between all 3 of them. And that's where we have the misattributed parentage experience, which is the discovery of a change in your perceived genealogy from a previously unknown or undisclosed assisted conception, adoption, or non-paternal event. And when we created Right to Know, we wanted to make sure our language and terms was super inclusive. We feel like anybody who feels trauma or any issues associated with learning about their genetic identity, come on in. We'll help you. We'll speak for you. We want to ensure that everybody has a right to know their genetic identity.
Thank you. That was a really great explanation. And when I just look at how this impacted each of you personally, Alesia, when I always knew that I was adopted, but when I found my birth mother, she had genetic breast cancer. A year later, I had it. Had I not found her, that information, I would have died. It's really that simple. So one element of this, Alesia, is, you had brain tumors. And my goodness, what can you tell us about how this affected you personally?
When I was sick, I had a brain tumor discovered in 2011. And at that time, I had no idea about my MPE status. I was very sick, and I had been told a possibility that I might die. The results of that surgery, I had 4 different surgeries, and the next year was a very trying time for me. But what ended up happening in 2014, when I did the DNA test and found out that I was indeed not who I thought I was, my identity was completely shifted. I went on this crazy 4-year journey of looking for my family. And when I did find them, it was then that not only did I find that I had cousins that had brain tumors, 2 of which are dead. I found a first cousin that has a granddaughter, with severe autism, and my own son has moderate to severe autism. So this, I can't even begin to explain it to you. The first time I noticed it was, what everybody else does. They get on social media and we find, we start searching for people when we find out who they are, kind of trying to just put together the pieces of people's stories. And I saw this young girl and I just started crying and I still didn't have my 100% that this was them, but I was pretty sure. And she looked so much like my son that it just made me go through a tailspin, that I realized, my God, I had found my family, and this is why I have the problems and the issues, and that it's not only, as you said, the genetics involved. You went through your own story with the breast cancer and what happened to you. So you can definitely relate to what I went through, the emotions, the no support from a family that had this whole issue. I went undiagnosed for a few years. It was a crazy, crazy time in my life. And thank God for the DNA giving me my true identity.
Gosh, I feel like genetic identity rights are really at the baseline of all of this. Kara, you talked about the pillars. Can you explain that? And because I believe that we are like the only group, there's this huge, vast vacuum of blank, black darkness where we came from, our identity, and it just feels so wrong to me.
It feels wrong, and most people just don't understand. It's really hard, I think, for people to understand the trauma that we experience until they experience it themselves. And as Right to Know works to pass legislation and we speak with legislators, you can see this moment of recognition on their face via Zoom or in their voices that were on the phone about, oh my gosh, this is traumatic. And we had no idea, and we hadn't stopped to think about it. So Right to Know has 3 pillars of service. We work in education in this very important realm of helping people to understand the trauma that we do experience and how not knowing our genetic identity can have major, like you guys were just discussing, detrimental effects on our health. And, those of us who have children, we're passing that on, and we have no means of knowing what we're giving to them. I feel like I can deal with my own inability to know about myself. But when you talk about your children, it gets so much more difficult as a parent. So education is really important. And then we also do mental health. We have so many mental health initiatives because this is trauma, and people need help when they find this out to varying degrees. And I used to think, once I went and saw a therapist, I could process my experience and wrap it up in a bow and put it on the shelf and move on. And after a few years, I've learned I'm going to deal with this for the rest of my life. Different things trigger me. I have to sort of ride the wave of whatever emotion is visiting me regarding my misattributed parentage. So mental health initiatives are super important. And then we have legislative initiatives, trying to ensure that we do have access to our medical history, our family history, and that adoptees and people conceived through assisted reproduction and those of us from a non-paternal event have a seat at the table. In the past, adoptees have not been allowed to sit at the table when laws have been made. And we're seeing that with assisted conception as well. So Right to Know demands that we all have a right to contribute to the laws that affect us just as much as they do the parents.
Yeah, absolutely. Exclamation point.
Think about what's kind of going on here. The adoption world has been at the table all along. They have known that this stuff was going on, that they were not getting the answers they need. The laws are always against them, and the laws are against all of us too. The NPEs, the misattributed, the not parent expected. We've got the late discovery adoptees that had no idea. We've got donor conceived. All of them have had absolutely no chair at the table. And so it's time, and we're starting to see that movement because of the over-the-counter DNA test. Thank God that we're at the beginning of something really important.
Really, really good point, because DNA testing has changed everything. You guys, when I was reading on your website, it was talking about there's just no space for secrecy anymore.
No, it's really not. And, one thing I love, Kara brought up, I love how she goes through the 3 pillars. I do a lot with the mental health side of things. And to be honest with you, if we didn't have the support team together, the mental health portion where we can have people to talk to, we would feel so alone in this. And I'm so grateful for people like you that have this podcast, because, we're only going to feel better when we're around other people that are have misattributed parentage. You have somebody to share it with. And so we kind of created our nonprofit, Right to Know, through the eyes and the lens of all of us that are dealing with these really, really emotional issues. I mean, thank God for the mental support, because we get comfort, we get friendship, and it's extraordinarily rich. The people that I personally have come across, I'm sure Kara would say the same thing.
Yeah, you mentioned the term misattributed parentage. That's a term that mental health professionals have been using for decades to explain this type of thing. Yeah, I know, right?
I've never heard of it, and I'm 55.
Yeah, so when we were looking and discussing terms, because when we first started, we had adoptees and people conceived through assisted conception saying non-paternal event doesn't always feel like it fits us. And so that's when we went and looked in the literature and found that misattributed parentage is something that the mental health community has been using to describe exactly what we're experiencing. And, one of the reasons we've had such success, I think, in talking to legislators about these issues is because it does cross. Anybody can have an MPE, right? Anybody can have a misattributed parentage experience. Doesn't matter your ethnic background, your socioeconomic background, your political views. It affects anybody. And the statistics are daunting. I mean, it's thought, and there's not any studies on this, although we just did a survey with more than 600 responses to it. So hopefully we'll dive into that data and have some information later about it. But they think 1 in 20 people in in the world, so 1 in 20, so that's 16.6 million Americans who probably have misattributed parentage. That's a lot of people who are going to need help processing the identity crisis, how to find their parents, their biological parents, how to reach out, redefine who they are. It affects the family that you now have if you're an adult, the family you grew up in, and then the bio family out there. So the ramifications of such a discovery is so widespread for any individual.
No, I think there's this great interview that you guys did, and it said, I love these questions or thoughts and feelings, common thoughts and feelings. It's always on my mind. There's not a day that I don't think about it. How will I ever heal? Who am I? How do I search? Who am I allowed to tell? I must protect my parents' feelings over my own. Loss of culture, both one you had and the one you didn't get. Shock, anger, betrayal, depression, genealogical bewilderment, and confusion is general. I know as an adoptee, I feel all of these things.
And so that's where the bridge is between all of these groups. And I love the idea of the Venn diagram where it all overlaps. And can you speak more about what you see as a way that all of us can connect and unify toward change?
Well, I think first we have to connect and unify to help each other. Alesia works a lot in our mental health initiative. We have a hotline, 323-TALK-MPE, that people can call if they need somebody to talk to who's experienced in MPE. We can help them. We pair people with resources. So if they're looking for a therapist who has experience in that area, we can help them find a therapist. We have a directory for that, a counseling directory of therapists who are experienced working with people with an MPE, or at least with the trauma associated with that. And then we also pair people with a mentor. So if you find out you're a late discovery adoptee, we'll reach out to people in our group and find someone else who has a similar experience, so you can have someone to talk to as you're going through all those emotions and the craziness of the initial onset of that discovery. So I think the first step is us helping each other. And then the next step is uniting our voice. We need, united, we have a much stronger voice in trying to affect change and trying to educate people. There is so much overlap. We can start with the basics to help the general populace understand. So if you are that person who's being reached out to by somebody who says, I think I'm related to you, you can have a positive reaction to that outreach and understand where that person is coming from. Everyone always says they're looking for money, and that is always the furthest thing from anybody's mind who's made this discovery. And then again, in changing and enacting laws, which law is slow, it's messy, it's sausage making, it takes forever. We were just talking to a legislator in Washington who opened up the Washington adoption birth certificates, and she said it took her 5 years to get that legislation passed. So people have to understand this is a long-term thing. It's going to take dedication and persistence. And if we all voice there's strength in our voices together. We need to do it together.
Yeah, Kara, you couldn't have said that any better. I mean, we are a community that we need to bring awareness. And so, Heidi, one of the things that's most important for us is that we have action. We lead by our own work that we do, but this is followed through with actual action and things that can be seen that we're doing. We read and hear a lot of stories. Kara and I run private groups of MPEs in the hundreds, and we have so many diverse stories that we come across, and our community is just growing and growing and growing. Kara also mentioned the study coming out. We're working now to put all that study together and integrate everything that we've gotten from that. We literally had over 600 people, like she said, want to share, from in that study. So it shows you the importance of how people are feeling about what they're going through. I love the adoption community. We're working so much with them to partner, and I've learned a lot actually from our friends. That's why it's so important for us to be able to work together. I mean, this is humanity. This is all about humans, about our emotions and advocacy. So we all need to be able to work together. And there are terms. You mentioned several things. I think you took that from an article that you read from Kate Murphy, if I remember.
Yes,
I did my homework too. But what's interesting though is the ambiguous loss that all of us feel when you guys, there's something they talk about even in infants that when they're born, they know something's different, and that goes on throughout life. And that's the same that happened to Kara and I. We may have been a lot older, obviously, when we found out about our situation, but when it hit, we found the truth out. We knew then. I mean, we were devastated. I mean, and there's not one person hardly that I've ever come across that doesn't talk about the mental state that they were in when they first found out that they were an MPE.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. It is such a catastrophic experience when you realize the significance of the loss through adoption or the loss of your history in whatever way that takes shape. And there's a dismantling that goes on. You can almost feel it happen when you're getting the news, or you're realizing, or you're awakening to the significance of it. And I think I really want to have hope and healing inside of all of this pain. And Kara, you spoke to something that was really important, is that we can't put it in a nice, tidy package and set it aside. And how do you advise people that are in so much pain with their own story? Obviously, you have a mental health component, but I think we need a light at the end of the tunnel. What can you speak to people who are maybe just finding this out, or maybe just coming to terms with all of this?
Alesia, do you want to start? Or
I just would want to say to anybody that's listening, you're not alone. And I think more than anything, there's a huge community out there that's growing, and we are here to help you out if you need it. Kara mentioned the Talk MPE phone number we have, but we know how it feels. We've talked to so many people, and it does take time. It takes a lot of time to get through this. This is not a one and done day type thing. It's something you deal with a long time. In fact, Kara and I spoke about this one time. We both think it takes at least 3 years to get through the shock of such trauma. And it was funny, we're thinking the same thing, at least 3 years. And one of the components of Right to Know is when we work hard to put people with mentors. And so if we have actually done a bit of training as a professional, as an RN, I take some time to help people learn what it means to be a mentor, to be able to listen to other people. And in that process, when we have people that reach out to us, if they need a therapist, we have a directory, and we work hard to find the appropriate therapist for that person in the state that they live in.
I would echo what Alesia was saying about you're not alone. I mean, what's the advice for somebody who just clicks open their ancestry DNA test? Take a deep breath. I mean, I say it's like every person who learns, for a late discovery adoptee, or someone who discovers, that their father isn't their father, either from assisted conception or an affair or one night stand or something. The moment you clicked that email open and figured it out. It's like when the shuttle exploded, or when Kennedy was shot, it's like one of those moments that's seared into your head. And I think just taking a deep breath and understanding how traumatic this really is, because at first, everyone always says, you're still you, nothing's changed, which is really the worst thing that we can hear. And our brain starts to focus on, this is different, that, who you see in the mirror. I couldn't look in the mirror for at least a month, because now who is this person, right? Who's this stranger that I'm seeing? And you have no clue where you come from. I must admit, we're getting better at finding people's genetic connections quicker, because more and more people have tested, especially if you come from European descent in the United States. More people in that community have tested. So it's a lot easier to find family. If you have, if you discover, African heritage, there's less testing in that community. So sometimes it can take longer. But, Alesia, how many years did it take before you found your genetic family?
It took 4 years. And of course, I'm one of the earlier ones in this with the DNA over the counter. I took the test early in 2014. The test became very popular around 2012. And then, of course, it took 4 years for enough family to have tested for me to have figured out, with the help of genealogists, who my father was. And
it took me about 4 months. And I have to say, living in that state of not knowing who my genetic family was just devastating. So I know adoptees face that. They grow up with that, not knowing. And so having to, I think, ensuring that people can find their genetic family when they want to find them is so important to the healing process too. We need to answer those questions about who we are and where we come from. And so that's another step, I think, in the healing process. And then having grace for ourselves and others. We reach out to family and we're rejected. Some of our raising family rejects us when they discover we're not related to them genetically. And then, 3 months later, everybody's taken a deep breath and things change a little bit. So I think just having grace with ourselves and grace with everybody else, because this is a process, it is a journey, It will change over time. It's like being on a roller coaster. And like I said, you do have to sit back a little bit and ride it. And having people to talk to about what you're experiencing, feeling, is so important. Again, you're not alone.
You know, Kara and I did a talk for another program, and one of I think it was a slide about a blurry house, Kara, if you remember that. And I don't know, I think a lot about that diagram of what must be going on in our heads, especially in 2014. It took 4 years. Now, Kara started her journey in 2017. Is that correct, Kara? Go ahead. Was it 17 now? Has it been that, or is it 18?
18.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when I first met Kara, and she was so raw in this, and the changes that you go through and what you're dealing with. I think Blurry House is a good way to describe the headspace that we're all in.
I couldn't even talk about my biological father without crying. 9 months into, somebody would say, well, what's his name? And you can feel it like locking up in your throat. You just can't voice it, and now I can talk about my experience without having that trauma associated with it. And it's just time helps to heal and talking about it.
Yeah. You had a speaker, Heidi, that was talking a lot about, I was a young woman. I think you had a Black lady, and it really was an emotional conversation you had with her. And we work a lot with Black people and dealing with finding their family, and some of these roots, and looking in genealogy, they cannot go further back than maybe in the 1900s at times. So you have this very blurry house. Everybody's in different spaces with what they can find out, and then there's this whole story about the fog, what could have been, what should have been, what's reality. And, these are all very emotional and trying times. And we are really excited about the work that's being done in the mental health, segment of what we're doing for Right to Know.
You're talking about the ghost kingdom, Alicia. And yes, I love not the fog. You're talking about ghost kingdom. And,
okay, there you go. Yeah.
I love, we've learned so much from the adoption community, because I have a little bit of a problem with the ghost kingdom, and I hadn't really, I had no word for what that was until I saw it on This Is Us, when they were talking about the ghost kingdom on that show. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's what I experienced. So yeah.
I don't even know how long that term had even been around when I heard it the first time.
But I think it's a coping mechanism. When you were talking about that grief, like that ambiguity, the blurry, where you can't really understand it. So you go ahead and you put your own imagery on that, whatever that looks like.
Exactly.
And then when reality funnels in, boy, that's a thing to deal with. And it's very hard to prepare for that, and nice to know. I love the time frame that you put around that, that 3-year mark. That feels really good to know that it's not going to be this horrible forever. We can get through this, and with help, for sure. Can you, Kara, I'd love to talk to you a little bit more too about your personal experience. How did you begin to integrate when you found out? Because I know, Alicia, you said when you saw your father, he was already gone. That's so sad and horrible. Did you find relatives that were alive and have the chance to actually interact?
My genetic family has rejected me. My biological father was also passed away. My mom was 18 when I was conceived, and my genetic father was 57, 58. So he'd be 104.
Wow.
So it actually makes genealogical research difficult for me, because I'm kind of a generation skip. He's the same. He's young. He's way older than my mom's parents. So I actually thought that he had one child, his son. I thought he was my biological father, just because he's older than my mother by a bit. But he passed away in the middle of my discovery. He was terminal. And I did speak with him once, and he said that he wished I would have found out sooner, but because he was terminal, and he died within a year of me, less than a year of me speaking with him. And then his father had passed away, and the rest of the family has said they do not wish contact. I think my experience is a little bit unique in the sense that my biological father was a prominent person in Seattle. And so my family said, well, just read newspaper articles about him. And there's pictures in the newspaper. So that's how you can find out about him. And it's a double-edged sword. I feel lucky that information is out there and available to me, because I hear stories about people whose family rejects them and they don't have that option. But it also doesn't paint a very good, like a picture of somebody, right?
No.
I know growing up, my mom would be like, why are you like that? I don't know where you come from. It should have been a clue, and now that I know about him and who he was, and I know Alesia through learning about her father has felt this too. You're like, oh, that's why
now it makes
this. And it's almost like a puzzle pieces that are fitting together. I mean, especially for me, I was talking about this with my husband last night. I was raised being told I was half Black. And so I was a square peg that I was told to fit in a round hole. And why don't you fit in that hole? And I just never fit in the hole, and I defended who I was my entire life. And so learning my DNA discovery, just so many light bulbs clicked for me about why my square peg did not fit in that round hole.
Right. And that is a painful process.
It is. And, for me, I feel like I was just asked in an email yesterday, do you consider yourself biracial still? And that's a really hard question, especially given the environment about race in our country right now. It complicates the matter. I can say what I feel like, but then there's also how I'm perceived with the general population. So major race ethnicity changes add a whole nother dimension to people making these DNA discoveries.
Yeah, I just think about when you're growing up and you're believing this about yourself so deeply. That would be I can understand why you couldn't look in the mirror. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Well, and your parent, that is the most trusted relationship, the child-parent relationship. I mean, late discovery adoptees, there's that betrayal. People conceive through assisted reproduction. There's that betrayal sense. You have a trusted relationship with your parent. You believe them. I mean, there's just what they tell you is true. There's no reason to question it. And so, I mean, a lot of people struggle later on. If you're the product, I will say my mom wasn't sure, and I don't know if that's true or not. I'm going to go with that for her. But, people whose mothers had an affair and they knew the truth about their child's origin and chose not to tell them. People who were adopted chose not to say, or people who were conceived through assisted reproduction. I mean, families are told. I think that's slowly changing. Again, adoptees paved the way for that, because now, 95% of adoptions in the US involve some sort of openness, right? It's got to be true for assisted conception. We can't hide this stuff from people anymore. I understand that there is some space where it could be dangerous for a mother to share that information. Maybe they're in a marriage where they can't tell the truth. But later, people need to know this. And if at all possible, they need to know from the earliest time period where they're starting to form memories about their unique conception, whatever it may be. We have such a broad, loving ability to make up family this day. It's so inclusive, and there's no reason we can't share. And, I try to explain to parents, it builds that connection with your child. If you're not the genetic parent, it doesn't take away from it. And later in life, if they feel betrayed, you've just really set that relationship back and maybe caused it irreparable harm. And it would be much better for you to be there to support your child through the process of trying to learn about their genetic identity. Not everybody comes out of the fog. There are people like my son's doctors, when I told him about our switch, because I went from having diseases associated with the Black community to diseases associated with the Ashkenazi Jewish community. He was adopted, and he said, I don't want to know. And there are some people who just don't want to know, and that's okay. But for the vast majority of people, at some point in their life, they want to know. And we need to have support there. We need to have the ability to find that information out soon, immediately. When we want to know, or we learn that we need to know, we need to be able to figure it out quickly.
Yeah, thank you for that. Alicia, what do you think about, the secrecy? Because I think that I want to believe that originally parents are doing that to try to be protective, right? Mm-hmm. But it's actually damaging. And I think this is an opportunity to educate. If you are this person who is withholding this information because of shame or because of insecurity, it is going to come back to bite you. Because I don't know how you guys experience this, but as an adoptee, I always knew something was off, that something just wasn't clicking. And when I understood the gravity of it all, which I just came through, it was like, okay, this all makes sense, that moment. So what can you speak to about that if people are listening?
Well, you actually just said it, Heidi, really well. Of what happens to us one-on-one, our personal health is at jeopardy when we are not told who we are and what we are about. We are put in a hole in the beginning of our lives when we don't know our truth. And when these secrets are kept, unfortunately, you're right. There was a culture shift from, the 60s or 50s where they were told, don't tell, the mothers were taken to some other state to give birth to the children and were said, shh, you're to keep all this a secret and you're not to talk about it anymore, which is so horrible for the mothers. And then the children, they grow up not knowing their truth because then they go to an adoption and the adopted parents are told, no, you do not tell them. It's horrible. It's coming from every angle. You can't get away from it. So when you go into this now, we're in a new age and we're different now. There's no more secrets. There's no anonymity. It's done. And I don't care even when we deal with the legal aspect of stuff, Kara's got a lot more patience with that than I do, but I get so frustrated at these people. They're like, oh, we got to think about this angle or that angle about a particular bill, how this can be done. But there is just no more secrets. And I think I try to be patient with people because I need to be, because it is we have to educate people. That's part of the whole process is just educating and making sure we explain that, hey, this is not right any longer. This is not good. And it's it becomes a mental health issue. And I can't tell you how many folks that come across that this one thing, it's to completely change their entire trajectory of their life. And so if we had to say one thing that we need to do to stop the secrets is to realize, think about the child. Think about when they grow up. We could think more about other people than ourselves and what maybe the culture used to be like. Get the eyeball off of ourselves and start thinking about others.
I would also say secrets fester. And so if you're the parent, either the father who knows the child was conceived through assisted conception, or sometimes, they weren't told the truth too. They would inseminate the woman and then told the couple to go home and have sex. And it could be the dad, it could be your husband's, right? But when there's a truth there, I think the people who hold those secrets, it festers for them as well as for the child later. And that festering can manifest in so many different ways. Either they're treating the child slightly differently and they don't realize it, how they live their lives, that it's so hard to rip that Band-Aid off, especially when we've been holding a secret for so many years. And that sort of holding that secret, I think can sometimes lead to drug and alcohol use. It can lead to depression for the parents. And they may not even understand that that's a direct cause of holding that secret, right? And so I think people who have held those secrets for so long, we had a family reach out to us. She had read Danny Shapiro's book, Inheritance, and they had conceived their daughter through assisted conception. And she was in her early 20s and they wanted to tell her. And they were like, how do we do this? And just so grateful that they understood, we got to do this. We have to do this now. One, they understood it was the right thing to do for their daughter, but also she may do a DNA test and figure it out on her own. And so I think if people come forward with those secrets, there's a much better chance of a positive outcome in working through that with their child than if the child discovers it on their own. Yes, there's still the sense of betrayal that everybody's going to have to deal with. But, we're adults. We need to stand up and own our actions and explain them and then work through it together.
So beautifully said. I used to sit in church and I was always bored, and I'd look up and it would said the truth will set you free. Mm-hmm. And the truth can be hard in a lot of these situations. But we deserve the chance to know and to be able to work through that. And as we wrap things up, what else would you like to speak to about what you see happening in the future? What do you think can impact and change the narrative surrounding this? Clearly, laws need to change. We need to have access to our birth certificates, to our identifying information, to our genetics. And that goes across that Venn diagram. Like, it all connects. So however you ladies want to wrap this up, it's all yours.
Well, for me, I live and breathe what we're doing. Kara knows this about me. I spend hours and hours thinking about what we can do to make things better for our communities. We are learning how much we are alike than different. We're separated. We can do more for each other when we're working together. We reach out a lot as Right to Know to other groups and other nonprofits and communities. And we say, hey, how can we help you? What is it we can do to help you? And that's become sort of our motto. We're looking for community. We're looking for finding people that really want to make a difference. And you spoke on the laws. Yeah, the laws are way behind, but we're going to get there. It's going to take a while. Maybe I won't be alive to see all that, but maybe I'll get to see the beginning of some of that stuff. But it's the hardest thing to see happen. And I thank God for Kara, because she's just, as she said in the beginning of your podcast, we know it's for the long haul. We have a long road ahead of us. And I hope if there's legislator people listening to Pulled by the Root today, that they'll go to our website, righttoknow.us, and give us a look over and just say, hey, we need to help these people. This is about a lot of people. We're talking anywhere up to 10% of the population deals with a misattributed parentage. And, you're not alone. We're here to help. And that's probably the most important thing to me, is that we want to do what's good for our group, our humans that deal with this.
You mentioned something that's so near and dear to me, which is birth certificates. I'm in the process. I don't know if I'll be able to change my birth certificate to show who my biological father is. One of the reasons we started Right to Know is because when I was reading the Uniform Parentage Law is what most states base their laws on this. And Washington State has adopted the most recent one, which includes surrogacy and a few things. But the law in there clearly states that someone who's conceived through assisted reproduction may not ever change their birth certificate to include who their genetic father is. And, people get confused, and I reiterate this, probably anybody who's listened to us talk about it, they've heard me say this before. Legally, birth certificates are there for who has to pay for the child. Little Timmy, it's a baseball in someone's window, who has to pay for it? So after age 22, when college is done, no one cares in the legal perspective about a birth certificate. But from a societal perspective, we care. We want our great-great-grandkids, when they're using Ancestry or whatever will be there later, 50 years, 100 years from now, to be able to find out where they come from. And so the law needs to start to reflect some of these societal reason we look at birth certificates. I think birth certificates need genetic mother. There should be a long form with genetic mother, genetic father, 4 legal parents, however many legal parents there are, believe it or not. In some states, you can have 3 or 4 legal parents for a child, and a space for surrogate. And when a child turns 18, they should have access to the long form of that birth certificate. And it can't be, the parent part can be updated, whoever's legally responsible, but the other stuff can never be updated. I say 18 because, as I mentioned before earlier, there are times when it is dangerous for the truth to be out for the parent. There can be, and we have to remember that. And I think, there needs to be a short form, because when little Timmy goes to sign up for baseball, the coach, you have to bring the birth certificate to prove the age. The coach doesn't need to know he had a surrogate. So there can be, who wants to explain that? So there should be a short form that you can use for every day, but there needs to be that long form. And that's really my ultimate goal for the future, because I want a future where no adult has to experience a DNA surprise. No adult should experience the trauma that we experience about not knowing who we are. We need to make sure that that doesn't happen to anybody in the future. And that's what Right to Know is dedicated to. Right to Know is dedicated to the idea that it is a fundamental human right to know your genetic identity. Full stop, period.
You could not have said that better. I so appreciate both of you, that you're taking your pain and turning it into power and into change and into action. I can't wait to see what you guys do next. And thank you so much for connecting with our community, and just the ability for us to link together creates just this more powerful chain of strength. And I just hope we continue to speak to each other and to embrace all of these organizations that are really aiming to do the same thing, which is a basic human right to know who you are. And I think that's a beautiful way to end. Thank you both for being with me today. It was amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you too. Thank you so much, Heidi.
Thank you. It's so nice to meet both of you.